And welcome back to another episode of TWiP Weddings. My name is Bruce Clark, and this week I am delighted to be joined by Brooklyn-based wedding photographer Spencer Lum from Ground Glass. I've got Spencer here to talk about momentum sales and how wedding photographers can refine their sales process to build a successful business. Welcome to TWiP Weddings, Spencer.
Hey, Bruce.
Hey, glad to have you on the show. It's just you and me having a little fireside chat this week. Brian and Robert weren't able to join us, but hopefully I won't scare you off and you'll come back on a future episode and we can have a good full roundtable discussion with the four of us. But really glad you could join us this week.
Glad to be here.
Yeah. So before we get into the show, of course, we just want to remind you how you can participate in the show. We've got several different ways to interact with us. First, you can visit our website at thisweekinphoto.com/weddings. There you will find the show notes for each episode, which contain links to everything we mentioned on the show. You can also leave your comments and your feedback for us in the comments section. And we do read those comments and take that feedback into consideration. It helps us decide what future topics we should cover. If you do have a question or if you'd like to suggest a topic that we could cover, you can also email us. Our email address is twipwed@thisweekinphoto.com. Or if you prefer using social media, just add the hashtag TWIPWed to your post and we will keep an eye out for your posts. And if you want to get involved with us socially, probably the best spot right now, the hot spot right now is our Facebook group. We've got lots of new people joining there every week. So join up our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/TWIPWed. And without further ado, let's jump into the show. So like I mentioned at the top of the show, I'm joined this week by Spencer Lum. And Spencer is a wedding photographer. I'm going to introduce you, Spencer, and you can tell me if I do a good job or if I miss anything.
All right.
So Spencer is a wedding photographer based in Brooklyn, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Excellent. And besides being a wedding photographer, he is also responsible for creating Ground Glass, which is an awesome online resource dedicated to helping photographers build their brand and grow their businesses in a crowded market. Spencer dispenses valuable insights into what it takes to keep a photography business moving and how to take it to the next level. So today we'll probably go all over the place, I think, with our conversation today, but we'll do our best to try to focus on the sales process and talk about something that you call momentum sales or momentum selling. And we'll kind of dig into sort of how do you find and attract the right clients, and then how can you improve your sales process to turn them into booking clients. So how did I do?
That sounds, I love it.
That sounds pretty good?
That sounds pretty good, yeah.
I covered it all if we were to get in the elevator. And
yes, that's my whole elevator pitch right there. So we're done.
We covered it. Done. Mic drop out. Perfect. So tell us a little bit about Spencer. Tell us about how you got your start in photography and kind of how it led you to, I guess, developing Ground Glass and all of that good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, geez, it's such a long question with how I got to start in photography, and I'm sure this is true for everybody. I mean, I've been doing it a long time at this point. I started way back in, it was 90 or 91, where I was working as an editor for the school paper.
Okay.
And I kind of had these aspirations of being a National Geographic photographer and traveling the world and doing all that, which really didn't happen. But I did, of course, wind up specializing in weddings along the way. That was back in 2003. So kind of after working as a photojournalist for a while and kind of coming out of that, I was trying to find a way to build a business for myself. And wedding photography was kind of where things fell. So what really got me started with Ground Glass, though, is along the way, I'd also had a lot of other businesses. I had a brand agency where we did kind of a lot of brand campaigns. We did digital design, back in web design, all sorts of other stuff. I had a couple other businesses. And one of the things that really struck me is, I came into this business, and like anyone, you're trying to figure it out. And it's a business you haven't done before. So you're trying to put together the pieces. And you do everything wrong. It's like,
yes.
I was like, every time I start a new business, like the previous businesses help you get rid of maybe 25 to 50% of the misery, but all 50% of it you're going to experience all over again in
all new misery.
Right, exactly. And it's like there's just no way around it. And the thing about photography is it's just so personal, and you do it on your own. And I think we live in this world where most people kind of are running businesses and feeling that, a lot of us, we spend our days on our own staring at a screen. And you do it on your own, and you're figuring it out on your own. And a lot of times for people, this is the first business they've actually decided to work on their own. And they're now, I mean, there's tons of information out there, which wasn't the case when I started. But even with that, it's incredibly hard to figure out what you're supposed to do, what actually works, what doesn't work. Or a lot of times there's a lot of great advice, but the question isn't whether the advice is good. The question is whether it's going to work for you, or if it's going to work for you at that particular time. Like there are certain stages in business where kind of if something works when you're really large, it's not necessarily going to work at the beginning. Or people have this all the time where something works at the beginning, and then as their prices go up, or they get more sophisticated, or they find a different audience, those things stopped working and they can't figure out how to move into the next stage. And so, you take a lot of hits along the way. And I was like, I see lots and lots of tactics out there. I see lots and lots of advice about like how to do this, 3 tips to do that, the 7th essential, blah, blah, blah. But really, I mean, there are no 3 steps that are going to build a business. There are no 7 steps that are going to build a business. If you work at it in reverse and you already have run a successful business, you can look at a list of 7 and say, well, these are the ones I'm going to use right now. But if you're looking at it the other way around, where you're starting out and you're trying to figure out what's going to work, that's not going to build a business. And so I wanted to create a resource for people where I could take some of the more complex, large-scale situations that happen with like large corporate businesses, things that come from research that's very robust and very detailed, but not really scaled down to fit smaller businesses. And really what I like to do is I like to take all that information and help distill it into a way that you can actually use when you're a small business, and then give people guidance and give people information about things that are going to work, and then kind of give them the why behind it so they get the context and know when it's going to work and when to use it, so they can actually take it and run with it, and it's going to be something they can keep going back to over and over. And that's what got me started with. Well, that's a whole long-winded sort of answer, but that's really that's what got me to now.
Excellent. So when did it all kind of begin? When did you start working on the ground glass concept, and when did you start realizing that was something that you kind of had a knack for, and in addition to your photography work and photography business, did they sort of both come along at the same time, kind of just organically, or was it sort of a point in time in your photography career where you went, I think I'm really strong at this business stuff. How can I start to share that? And
yeah, no, I mean, for me, in most of my life, I am convinced I just suck at most things. And I don't say that I neither say that kind of, I kind of half mean that. It's not a total joke. Obviously, I don't mean that to knock myself down and say I don't believe in myself either. But what it is that you come into a task, and some of them you're better at, some you're not. You never really know how good you're going to be. But what you can do is you can keep working at it. You can keep on going and going and going and see what works. And some of the things will come easier, some are going to come harder. But everything I've ever done, I mean, sales, right? That's something I know we'll talk about a little bit today. But sales is something I was horrible at, and that was kind of a blessing. The whole reason I can teach sales is because I was so bad at it. I kind of had to learn every tiny little microscopic step along the way to understand how to teach myself. And because of that, I knew kind of it's okay, I can tell someone, well, these are the steps you got to go through. But some of the things, let's say, that I've been better at in life that came easier, sometimes they're so intuitive, you don't actually know why you're doing them. You just kind of do them, right?
They just become routine, right? You
Right.
just do them, almost on autopilot.
Right. So a lot of it, I wouldn't say necessarily, I mean, I've kind of, people tell me that I have a way of saying things sometimes. And if they feel that way, I'm flattered, and I think that's awesome, right? And that makes my day. And if there's something I bring to the table, I mean, it would be that way. But really, it wasn't so much that I see myself as kind of being preternaturally gifted coming into it. I see so many people, it's boom, they come into the scene and it's they're just good. Maybe they're good at photography, maybe they're good at business, but it's just they just seem gifted, right?
Right. They're like Tony Robbins. They just
right. It's exactly
born. They came out of the womb just ready to sell and motivate.
Exactly, right. And I wasn't like that. I just kind of, even with ground glass, I started, and I, because I'd run a brand business, there was a lot I knew about branding, and there's a lot, especially I knew about large corporate scale branding, and with some very, very sophisticated campaigns. And so that was something I knew about. Whether I was good at it, I probably wasn't bad, in my day, we had pretty big accounts and all that. So at least the experience was solid. But But really, I mean, kind of I had that, and I was like, well, okay, like let me start bringing that into ground glass. But even with ground glass, it was like I had to learn to communicate and learn to teach and learn to actually understand how I could actually give something to people. If you read my early articles, some of which are actually not up anymore, but if you read, but some of them are, I mean, they're just horrible. Like you'll look at it and you're like, there's nothing you can use it for. There's no good advice there. I mean, maybe there might be an okay piece of advice, but I don't communicate it in a way that you could really process it and use it.
Mm-hmm.
And so even that was a learning experience. But so, you know, the answer is like, well, I don't know. I mean, mostly I have just like, I've been in the business for a long time, and I just keep on trying, and I keep on looking for things to work on and develop. And that's what I like to share with people.
Yeah. And I think that's a big part of being a solo. I like to call, a lot of photographers, we're solopreneurs, right?
Yeah.
We're entrepreneurs, but a lot of us, you mentioned this kind of the solitary nature of the work that we do. A lot of photographers are just one woman or one man shows for the most part, and they're the chief cook and bottle washer in the business, right? And they're the ones making all the decisions, but it's oftentimes done a lot in isolation.
Yeah.
Which can be, it can be exciting because you have the full control in your hands. You can take it whatever direction you want. There's nobody else telling you what to do. And that's one of the allures. That's one of the draws for, I guess, getting into any kind of business, be it wedding photographer, other creative, starting your own business. That's, I think, the initial allure. But then the reality of there's, some stuff that you just don't enjoy doing. And it's different for everybody, right? Some people are naturally gifted at, like you mentioned, at sales. Or they're just really organized, so they do really well with project management and client management, but maybe they're not as strong of an artist, whereas you have others who are maybe really strong on the artistic side. They're really good at Photoshop, they're really good at Lightroom, they're great photographers, but maybe they just don't enjoy the business end of it. So it's trying to find that happy balance, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think, I don't know if you notice this, or in talking to other photographers, do you notice that there's kind of, everybody wants the instant success? There's a bit of that instant gratification society that we live in. Everybody wants stuff now. Mm-hmm. They don't want to wait for it. So they want kind of just this magic bullet recipe of, okay, if you tell me these 5 things, then tomorrow I'm going to have a successful business. Do you find that is maybe one of the big things that holds photographers back, is that if they don't get that instant success, they kind of throw their hands up and give up?
Yeah, there's a lot of allure to that, right? I mean, there's a lot of allure to the idea that if you can kind of wash, rinse, and repeat, that everything's just going to work itself out. And in a sense, I think it's true, as in if you keep trying and you're willing to kind of go out and go out on a limb, you will actually succeed. But that's almost the exact opposite, because going out on a limb means you're willing to try out something that other people aren't, or try harder, or do it in a more daring or different way. But I think it's dangerous. I mean, it is a very dangerous idea, because, in the beginning, what's deceptive is it kind of works to some extent. Now, not as much as it used to, because this has become a hyper-competitive industry.
Yes.
But there was a time, and there still to some extent is, that kind of when your prices are really low, there are certain things you can do and kind of copy as a way of learning that will get you to a certain point. And I have nothing against people kind of starting out that way. And in fact, I have nothing against anyone taking any approach as long as it works for them.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what the danger is that you start off that way. I mean, there's the temptation in the first place, because we do have this instant gratification society that tells you, well, this is all you have to do. So there's that initial temptation and kind of that idea that that's how it works. And then you apply it and it gets validated to some extent, seeing, oh, it worked. And you think maybe you're getting booked because you did A, B, and C, but you're actually getting booked because let's say only because you're the cheapest person or right. Whatever. I mean, that's a super simplified example, mm-hmm. But that definitely happens. And so you think you're doing something right, and you were for that price point, it was fine. But once then you go and listen to the advice that everyone gives, which is you got to raise your prices. And it's true, you have to raise your prices. But you do that, and then suddenly everything falls apart, and then you're in a panic, and you're like, well, what do I do now? How do I get mm-hmm. clients? How do I get business? And very often the answer is, well, I mean, it's you have to learn how to run a business,
right?
And people don't realize it. It feels like you've learned to run a business, But a lot of times the skills that are involved kind of from a day-to-day basis, you actually wind up not acquiring them. And it's not the fault of the people doing it. It's just kind of like that tends to be when you learn on your own. That just tends to be the nature of, at least in this world, of how things go and how people learn.
And you kind of went through that, right? You experienced
Oh,
that in your own photography career, right? You reached a point where you kind of started to do that, where you raised your prices, and then I think you
yeah.
wrote in your blog, I read about that, and it sort of, and then the bottom fell out, and you wondered what happened. Was that? Tell us a little bit about that. And
Yeah, I thought I was doing great, and I was kind of riding this wave where at the time I started, it was really easy to get into the industry, and it was fairly easy to turn a profit, and I was turning a pretty decent profit for most of it, but it wasn't because of me. It was just like the economy and the world around me. And so I was kind of I take credit, in my head, I took credit for it at the time, thinking, yeah, I'm doing all this stuff right. But as soon as I raised my prices to kind of match what other people were offering, then of course, boom, business just evaporates, and I'm not getting any calls. And well, I am getting some calls, but like the meetings I'm having, no one's booking, no one's moving forward. And that's when I suddenly realized, I'm like, oh, this is a problem. And that was kind of the first time I had to start thinking, well, maybe I don't have the business skills that I thought I did. Because, obviously I'm looking around and there are other people who are getting paid that amount for, well, let's say in my mind, maybe the same quality photography. And maybe even like as a photographer, I wasn't as developed as I needed to be. And maybe I thought my photography was better than it was. I don't honestly have an answer to that question. You'd have to go back to that time and look at everyone else out there in my work. So I don't even know. But I do think I probably overestimated the quality of my pictures, and I definitely overestimated the quality of my business skills. And so there's just kind of this big vacuum, right? I kind of pushed forward into a level that I really wasn't ready for, and I had just kind of deceived myself into thinking I was. And the panic I had created was nothing other than a reflection of the fact that I hadn't kind of crossed my T's,
cross my eyes and
dotted my I's. Yeah, I don't even know how to cross my eyes, actually. Yeah, but really, that's what it came down to, right? That I just hadn't put together the basics.
Yeah, so it's sort of developing that foundation to the business to kind of keep it sustainable, keep it running, and not just based on one thing, like being the lowest price, right? Having all the different marketing pieces. I worked for an IT company for a number of years, and it was a time where the economy was doing so well. You didn't have to do anything to get work to come in the door, because wasn't as much competition, and there was just tons of work. So you didn't really have to work that hard. And then it started getting more competitive, and it started getting harder, and the phone stopped ringing as much, right? Work just didn't come in. So now, because we hadn't been focused on the marketing and the advertising and building some of those foundations, we were just sort of just running on the fact that we were getting lots of business coming in. So we weren't building the underlying foundation. And then as soon as things slowed down with the economy and things, more competition crept in, all of a sudden, the phone started getting quiet. So I remember that from my IT business days, and just working at a company and seeing that happen. And then it was a point where, like, okay, now we actually have to work to start to get clients in the door. Like, they're not just falling in the door at us.
Right. Yeah. It's funny because I guess it's one of those things that breeds bad habits. Like, I never used to ask people for referrals, as an example. I can't tell you how many referrals I've gotten in my life from nothing other than asking.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds like the most disappointing tip you can give a person in the world. Like, well, how do you get referrals? And sure, there are all sorts of other little nuances and things like that. But the big answer is, well, you ask for them.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember the first time I heard that, I thought, well, come on, what's the real secret?
There's got to be a trick. There's a gimmick to it.
Like, come on, tell me I'm not going to share it. Just tell me what the real story is. And I remember, I distinctly remember this conversation. The photographer's like, you just have to ask.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't that she was trying to hold out or that she didn't kind of know other things. It was kind of, I think she saw kind of like my miscomprehension was so elemental that really that was the one piece of advice that I needed at that time. And I think that, that one piece of advice alone is probably, I'm sure by this point it's generated like hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars of business. Just one line, right? but what I probably also did was I lost out on hundreds of thousands of dollars of business because it took me a long time before I started asking. And it took me a long time before I believed that was valuable. In fact, actually, I had to prove it to myself. The only reason I started doing it is I got so desperate once business started getting tighter. I'm like, well, maybe I remember that person had talked about that. Let me try it out. And this was like years and years later, right?
Mm-hmm.
I just started doing it in the first place. But I was looking for the newer, shinier object, right? That's
Sure.
like, that's the inside secret. It's like, well, the inside secrets are usually like doing a good job at, there are all sorts of details and nuances and subtleties of doing a good job with all of the fundamentals. There are a gazillion tricks, but usually, they still tie to kind of these core activities as opposed to kind of like, I don't know. You see it so often. It's like, if you just know this one thing, everything's going to change. And it's like, we don't really live in that. Yes, sometimes there are things like that. I don't want to say it never happens in the world, but we have a hyper competitive world. And, like you said, IT, right? IT on the surface, it seems like it couldn't be nothing could be more different than photography, but really, it's the exact same. Business dynamics tend to be very similar across businesses. And it's just what happens in one place tends to happen in another. And we have a hyper competitive world where on almost every market, everything is somewhat commoditized. It's like, it feels like a unique complaint in our industry where we're saying like, no one appreciates us, and people are always fighting for value. But honestly, I can't think of an industry or a type of product or service where when you're looking at someone good and valuable, where your first reaction isn't, what, it costs that much? It doesn't matter what. It can be for a car mechanic, or it can be for a watch you buy at a store, or it can be for wedding photography. But it's like, this is a competitive world, and kind of raising value and elevating everything is kind of the essential skill. And it starts with really understanding all the core basics and then knowing how to play with that and turn it into something.
Yeah. And I think, clients now are a lot more sophisticated than they were years ago too, right? And you mentioned that hyper competitive market. It's interesting. I just spoke this week with Susan Stripling about the launch of her wedding school. And she, one of the things that she mentioned is that it's getting a lot harder, even for her. She's, a well-established photographer with amazing work. She says she's finding it harder. It's not so much the booking rates are changed, but she's finding it's taking a lot longer now to close sales. Clients have a lot more tools at their disposal. I think the internet has changed that a lot, but just the public has become a lot more, they're a lot more savvy. But do you find that they're also a lot more, I guess, cautious, or they're a little more guarded when it comes, because they're inundated with so much in the way of marketing and advertising and sales that they kind of approach a lot of any kind of relationship when there's going to be an exchange of something, goods and services and money, that they approach it with a little bit of skepticism. Do you find that is the case these days?
I find that, yes and no. This is going to be one of those, well, if you do it right sort of things. I don't know. It sounds like a lot of bravado when I say it that way. But really, if you do sales kind of with coming in with the right mindset, I actually have not found any real changes in terms of like my ability to close. And most people, they'll usually hire me on the spot or within 24 hours. There's not like a delay of any longer than that typically. And I mentioned that because I've kind of been measuring that for years now, ever since I really started developing kind of that my whole momentum sales program and that approach. And that hasn't really changed. Inquiry is definitely more competitive than ever. I think people are they have a ton of photographers they probably reach out to or what have you. And there are more photographers out there than ever who are good. And so there are more choices and blah, blah, blah. And if there were a common complaint I heard in the industry, it's about like people like, I can't get anyone to reply to me. But but I would say that getting back to your question kind of about the level of skepticism, the answer is it depends where you come from when you're trying to connect with people and how you're trying to, like, what is your persuasion mechanism? In a sense, like, to me, if you do sales perfectly, there is no persuasion mechanism. You influence people, but you don't persuade. And what I mean by that is, like, we all know that phrase, like, you could sell a great salesperson. They talk about how they could sell ice to an Eskimo. Right. But of course, the whole point of a great salesperson doesn't want to sell ice to an Eskimo. Is kind of that has to be the first premise, right? If you're selling and you're a you're truly good at it, your premise should be like, if I have an Eskimo in front of me and I've got ice as my product, I don't present that to this person. I need to find the people who need ice. And actually, I mean, that should be the first order of business before sales comes in. When you look at kind of marketing and branding and positioning, that should be coming. It's like a lot of people actually are selling ice to Eskimos. And what they need to do is they need to find ice. They need to find a desert as their audience. And instead of trying to find a desert, what they're trying to do is learn how to connect with Eskimos to sell ice. And so you voluntarily put yourself in a position where you enter like the most competitive market where everyone is kind of fighting for it. And then kind of when the sales meeting comes along, because you're in a situation where you've got ice for an Eskimo, you're trying to kind of persuade. And persuade, I mean, on its own, that's a fairly, I mean, that doesn't have a horrible connotation, but what does, of course, is being pushy. Mm-hmm. And you know, the reality is, and this is kind of one of those very, very, very misunderstood things, but like pushiness, it's, I hesitate to say this because if I say it, I know that people are going to take it the wrong way. Because I do think like you never want to be kind of scammy and slimy and corner people and things like that.
That's the used car salesman type of mentality,
like, Nobody wants that. But my favorite example, and I can't remember how I heard this. I heard it in, gosh, where was it? It was in someone's marketing promo. It wasn't for weddings, but it was a piece. And so I wish I could give the person credit. But the example that I heard, you know, he says like, well, I want you to think of your favorite company or your favorite store, right? Now, when they present something to you, a special offer, about about this product that you love, do you get mad at them? And do you say, oh my God, I hate you, you're trying to push this on me? Or are you excited and happy and jumping up and down that this new thing just came out? In fact, when they tease you with how this new piece of thing is, this new thing's going to be coming, watch out for it. And they say, hey, sign on to this list. And I mean, I know we're talking about lists and this is online right now, but I mean, the same mentality applies with in person and with weddings and with everything. But, when they say that and get on the special list to be the first notified, if you love that product, you don't say, oh, you guys are taking me for a ride. You get excited. It's like, yeah, I'm on this special list. I can't wait for this thing, right? You actually enjoy the experience. And so, no one enjoys being cornered and being forced to buy something they don't want. But actually, if you provide a great experience, I mean, good sales is giving people exactly what they want. And if you give a great experience that makes them love the whole part of the ride, they actually like assertiveness. Let's call it assertiveness instead of pushiness, right?
Right.
But they actually like that connection. And so that understanding is huge because you have to know when you're talking with a client, whether it's through marketing activity where like you're reaching out by emails or whatever, or sales activity in person. And wow, my room's getting really dark. So
sun is setting.
I know, it's what's happening is I keep trying to move closer and closer to the monitor to get the light. Let me turn up the brightness on the monitor. There we go. Going back to that scenario, right? It's so important that you understand the experience of the client and you understand when you're actually persuading. In other words, you're trying to do something that's really just in your own interest, and when you're trying to communicate and help them and do something valuable and give them an experience. In other words, something that's actually going to be in their own interest. And when you do give something that's in their own interest, they actually want the assertiveness. They want guidance. They want help. They want you to recommend this, even if it costs more. They want to be presented with options. They want you to suggest, hey, let's, even like they want to move forward. And it seems weird when you don't, let's say, present a contract or ask if they're interested or something like that. And people are so afraid of being pushy that they don't realize that they're actually kind of, they get so, I mean, when you think about it, right? When you're thinking about being pushy, I mean, yes, on the surface, you're thinking, I don't want to be mean to my clients, sure. But are you in your client's head and thinking, how are they feeling? What do they want? How can I really service them and help them? Or are you in your own head thinking, I just don't want to be pushy and I don't want to look a certain way. I don't want them to perceive me a certain way, right? And when you think about it like you're really in your own head. When where you want to be in a sales meeting is in their heads. And I don't mean their heads like to be kind of, I mean, yes, you want to know exactly what they're thinking, but I don't mean to take advantage of them. I mean, you want to be in their heads so you understand, like, what are they feeling? What do they need? And so even this whole idea of pushiness, a lot of times it distracts people from the real issue, right? What counts is what your client feels, what they want, what they need. And the more you can observe that and be perceptive about it, the better you're going to connect. And I have never found a client where when you dedicate your time to just kind of serving them, where there's resistance, because there's complete transparency there. Everything you do is for them. It's in reaction to them. And so there's no like, oh, what are you trying to do to me? Or what are you trying to persuade me about? Because you're not, and they can tell and they can feel it. And so the answer is, yeah, if you try to sell even in the unconventional, like not unconventional, but kind of the passive way where people are like, let me show you my stuff and let me show you my prices, and but I'm going to be really laid back and friendly.
And if you'd like to book me, okay, great. But if you don't, it's okay, because you don't want to be pushy, right? Yeah.
Right. I mean, yes, people are more savvy than ever. And there's actually, it's ironic, but you can actually have less, if you serve people and you're assertive, you will have less resistance than if you're kind of laid back, but you're not paying attention to your client, you know? So it's kind of like the fundamental premise of how you interact with your client is way more important than, for example, an issue of whether you're pushy or not. Like pushy is kind of like, that's down the line, you know, pushy is, it works itself out. If you're serving people, you're not going to be pushy, because if you're reading people, you'll know how far you should take things and what you should ask for and when you should and shouldn't, right? And it'll resolve itself. You don't have to worry about it. But yeah, I mean, you know, the simple answer on the other side is, yeah, there's no doubt. Like if you kind of come in and you're not like giving incredible value in your meetings before people have even hired you. You know, if you're not doing that, then yes, people are hypersensitive. They've got a lot of options out there. And you know, you can probably, hopefully, you know, I am a big advocate of serving people, and I'm a big advocate of sales, because I feel like this is your one-on-one contact where you really get to know people and you can really help them and figure out problems, because there's a lot of people never talk to their clients again until like the wedding day, other than emails back and forth. You have human contact, whether it's on the phone or whatever right now. It's like this is when it starts. And so it's a huge differentiator though, right? I mean, if you're in a hyper competitive market, well, how do you differentiate yourself? I mean, you're not going to find a better chance than having someone who's willing to sit down and talk with you for like an hour. I mean, it's like, what more could you ask for?
Yeah. So that's, we could probably do a whole show just on this question, but how do you, because you mentioned it off kind of at the top of the show, that one of the biggest things you hear from photographers is, you know, they'll get these inquiries, whether they're coming in, a lot of times nowadays, they're coming in via an email.
Yeah.
And you reply to them, and it's like a black hole. It just goes out and it never comes back in. So just, again, we could probably do a whole show on this, but just how do you get them to reply back to you so that you can get that opportunity to get in front of them and learn more about their needs and things? Because I've found that's probably been our biggest struggle is, you know, we'll get these inquiries and you reply back, you follow up with phone calls, if you're getting their phone number, and it's just that you never hear from them again. It's a black hole. The ones that we do get a hold of, we generally do a pretty good job of booking, but
yeah. I mean, there are multiple things at play, and you're right. It's kind of like a subject for a whole show, right?
Yeah.
But I'll throw out a few things. The example I always give, and I give it because this is like, I don't remember what I said earlier that was ridiculously simple. Oh, asking for referrals, right? This is one of those types of things. I mean, this does not apply to everyone, but it applies to a lot of people, which is just like responding very quickly. And again, it's one of those disappointingly simple answers. And I should probably play it up more to make it sound more spectacular and give it a name so that people really listen and think, yes. But
respond or die.
Exactly. It's like you got to use the respond or die technique. You know, if you give everything a name, like it becomes more important, right?
Yeah.
So there was this study done though, and it wasn't for weddings, but I have my experiences. It's just as true. Whether the percentages and ratios and all that is true, I don't know. But the principle, absolutely. But what they found is that, like, I always have to reread it to remember the differentials, but it was something ridiculous. Like if you reply in 5 minutes versus 30 minutes, it was something like, you know, you have like a 10 or 20%. And that percent is 10 or 20 times more likely that people are going to reply back to you, right? And so, in fact, they even found differences between, like, I don't know, again, much smaller differentials, like between 1 and 5 minutes. And it was like, it wasn't a small margin. It was something like that type of difference alone, like 5 minutes might translate to like a 400% chance increase that people are going to get back to you. It's like, well, a 4x improvement in inquiry response just for getting back faster. I mean, that's the easiest thing you could do in the world. Like sometimes I'll have people say, but I can't monitor my phone all the time. And there are ways around that. You know, you can just set up your phone to send you a notification if you have a special email for inquiries, for example. That's the least amount of work you could ever do in a business to acquire a 4x increase in any part. Like if someone told me if I'm running, I don't know, a Facebook ad and I want to get a 4x improvement or a 30x improvement, I mean, I'd be jumping up and down if it was something that simple to figure out. If I could improve my booking rates just with that small. And so, you know, people say, well, I can't do that. I'll be chained to my business. I'm like, well, you know, if you don't, you're chained to your business because you're stressed and worried and you're not getting enough bookings and you're spending like 100 hours a year or, you know, 500 hours a year doing other activities that could take you kind of, you know, like 5 minutes a week or something like that. Right. And so it sounds simple, but it's huge. It's huge because if you're the first one in, most people are still at their computer. If you reply like 1 or 2 or 3 minutes, I mean, first people are kind of impressed. People think they're gonna see it as, oh, I'm really needy, but people don't think that hard about things. Like we're very self-centered. If someone replies to me quickly, you know, I'm not thinking, what is the other person doing? I'm thinking, hey, I just got something faster.
Right. Yeah. They mustn't be very busy. They're probably not very good.
Right.
I think we could get into our own heads and think that sometimes that, if I respond too quick, I'm going to look needy or not very busy or whatever. Right.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, people say this. I'm like, you know, I've asked clients specifically about this. I never thought it was the case, but so many people asked me about that one that I finally started asking people to check. And it's like not a single one was like even thought about it. They're just like, oh, I was really happy you replied to, you know, to me, that was a sign that you really care and you're always going to reply that fast, right? It's like, I mean, you know, what does anyone do when you send out an email to someone else and you expect like if you're having a problem with a company and you're expecting to reply in a day and they reply like 5 minutes later, it's like, do you sit around and say they're having troubles, or do you sit around and say, yeah, they're on top of it.
Right.
They're good, right?
Yeah.
So super easy, super simple, and immediate response. And so that's always kind of my big one. I know that doesn't solve the problem for everyone, but for so many people, like they're like, I always reply within 2 hours. I'm like, 2 hours, you know, 2 hours in this world is like,
they've moved on and booked somebody by then, right?
Yeah. It's like you can send mail. You feel like you should be able to do things through mail at that pace.
Yeah, so, it's funny because when we meet with clients, sometimes that's the feedback we get. We say, you know, have you talked to any other photographers? And we're like, yeah, you know, we talked to about 10, and you guys were the only ones that got back to us. It's been a couple of days, and then you're like, what? Huh? So
right.
How is that possible? But
I know exactly.
So how do you balance that? Here's a little counter argument. Play devil's advocate. How do you counter that though with that work-life balance, right? Because I know that we'll get inquiries, and a lot of them happen late at night when people are home. They're in front of their computer. How do you balance that with kind of that work-life balance, right?
Right. Yeah. How do you? Well, I mean, the answer is, I mean, I'm going to duck it in a sense. You know, I'm going to say, well, you kind of don't. But what I mean by that is, you know, you have to look at the bigger picture of the implications for your business. Because, you know, when you're a small business owner, your business is your life, and the health of your business is your work-life balance as well. So if something gets, you know, you got to balance, well, how much do I get out of this, versus how much does it cost me? Because I see, you know, the amount of, like I was saying, like the amount of stress and the amount of work people do to people love working on marketing because it's very passive. No one's like, and it's not like sales where you kind of have to confront it head on and you have to deal with your own psychology and stuff. Marketing is always like kind of fun. Well, not everyone thinks so. I think it's fun.
Yeah.
And a lot of people do because it's kind of passive and you get to work on it and think about these great theoretical thoughts about what your aspirations are and stuff like that. And marketing is super important. You know, by no means do I think marketing is not important, but sometimes I'll see, you know, a lot of businesses, they'll spend like, let's say 95% of their time working on their marketing and 5% on sales. And it's like, well, that makes no sense. Like if someone's booking like 100%, great, you know, and let's say also if they're kind of having good package, like their package values are high. So I mean, because that's the other part of sales, it's not just your booking rate, but it's kind of getting the rates where they need to be.
Right.
So if those things are fine, that's fine. But, you know, I'll see businesses where they're like, you know, they're booking 40%. And I'm like, well, the amount of time it takes to go from like a 40% booking rate to an 80% booking rate, which effectively doubles your clients, is actually a lot less lot less pain than it takes through marketing and, let's say, networking and everything else, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's not to champion sales specifically. I mean, because like I said, I mean, I am a big advocate in having branding, and I think super, super important. But it's just an example of, like, a lot of times, like, you have to balance kind of how effective something is going to be for your business and how much time you're putting into the different activities, and they all need a certain amount. But I will say this is kind of how I usually duck out of the question. I mean, if you kind of live on a commune, and although I imagine then you'd have a whole different business model. But if you live on a commune and you're separated from your phone and from your computer and stuff, I think something like what I'm saying about inquiries, it may really infringe on your ability to live kind of a full life. And I think that's completely legitimate. Obviously, I'm choosing a very extreme example, but you get the idea. But so often I see people, I'm like, well, if you have the time to go and watch some useless viral video on Facebook 20 times a day and make a comment on it and share it with people, or flip through Instagram and like a bunch of people just so that they like you back, it's like, well, then you have the time to reply to inquiries. And it's like, you're not going to get nearly as many inquiries if you're getting an inquiry per day. I think most people are going to be pretty happy, right? Yep. I mean, it's like the amount of inquiries you're getting. It's like, well, the amount of infringement compares to how much something like Facebook sucks out of your daily life. Yeah, is like, I mean, it's like there is some value in things you can do on Facebook, I imagine, but. Really, I mean, it's kind of like, well, yeah, work-life balance is important, but then kind of, I also like, just like so many people, you have to make a decision, like whether, like, are you saying this is really work-life balance? Like, are you really?
Yeah,
is it truly, or is it like a resistance that I don't want to do it?
More work balance.
Yeah,
I find, right? It's real work versus perceived kind of busy work, right? This is that work balance, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So, okay, so that's I think that's some good advice and a good tip is just, respond to those inquiries as they come in. Like I said, that's the feedback we get a lot from when we meet clients, is they're really like, they were impressed by just how quickly we got back to them. So that's a conscious decision that, that I make to respond back to them. Now, it can open up some Pandora's box in terms of setting some precedents with the client, in terms of that they feel that, okay, Bruce responded to me at 10 o'clock at night. So once we've engaged his services, now, I can text or call him at 11 o'clock at night and I should expect an answer. So you do have to kind of be a bit, I guess, careful in the expectations that you're setting from the beginning. And we've talked about this on a previous episode about kind of managing those expectations and things. So I guess that's always a little bit of that double-edged sword, right? Like you want to be available, be accessible, but then you also set a little bit of that precedent that now they come to expect that, okay, if I send an email to Spencer, it could be midnight, Spencer's going to get back to me in 5 minutes. And when he doesn't, now it takes away from the experience. So you have to be prepared that if you do go down that path, you're kind of setting that precedent a little bit. Is that right? Fair to say?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say. I mean, like you said, I'm sure you've talked about it, and I'm actually not going to jump into this one. But yeah, I mean, I think there are ways around it. But you have to be, I mean, it's exactly like you said, it can potentially set a precedent. So the core is like, you have to know. I think one of the big problems in businesses is a lot of times people don't know that they have problems. If you don't know you have a problem, like I didn't when I raised my rates, right? I didn't know that I was having problems, that I didn't know how to sell. I had a whole theory about why my sales was great. I had no idea that I was actually just horrible at it. And so, if you have a problem, you can work on it and fix it. And, kind of the honesty of running a business is actually a huge part. It's and I don't mean that people are intentionally dishonest, but there's a lot of fear involved in running a business, and fear is a really oppressive, difficult thing, and it colors your views of the world. It makes you think things are certain ways and make up reasons sometimes when they're really not. And sometimes, business is an activity of the real world. It's going to be based on what really happens in other people, not what's inside your head. So it's kind of like, I think you're right on. It's like, yes, it can set a precedent. And the key is, well, you have to figure out a way to solve that problem, which you can if you're aware of it and you work on it and you manage it. But if you don't know, then, it creeps up on you and it kicks you in the ass later on. And then, it's reactive. Once a problem is already kind of fully manifested, very often it's hard to solve. When if you just sent out one email like months and months earlier that takes no effort at all, like it never would have happened.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move just to switch gears then. Let's change gears. I want to get into the actual momentum selling and the momentum sales. And
Yeah.
so tell me a little bit about that. It was in your webinar a few weeks ago. You had a webinar, and I really loved what you said about a client is someone you protect. A customer is just someone that buys something from you, right? And I think that's we want clients, not customers, in as a wedding photographer. So how does that fit in with the whole momentum sales and momentum selling?
Yeah, I love that. I love that whole story. Sometimes I talk about it more than others because people kind of find it kind of obscure, but I'll throw it out there since you bring it up. But the whole origin, right, comes from the Roman definition of a client, where a client is someone under your protection.
Mm-hmm.
And the example I use is that a client is someone under your protection. But if you think about that particular phrase, I mean, first, I think in and of itself, that's a beautiful model. It's exactly what it is about serving people. It's kind of like a Secret Service agent. You're willing to take the bullet, right?
Yeah.
And, does that raise value? Well, of course. If you come in with that mentality that that's your level of service and that's what your role is, it also takes out a lot of the ego and stress and anxiety, I find, where you realize, like, yes, I mean, I really do think the best thing you can do in any, not just job, but in any role in the world is kind of serve others. When you think about the greatest people that humanity has ever known, the distinct thing you'll find is they all served. They didn't take. They didn't. Well, I mean, okay, some maybe, but typically, I mean, they served. If you think about, I don't know, whoever, Martin Luther King Jr., right? I mean, they served people in a way. They served society. They brought something that kind of furthered humanity. Anyway, getting back to it.
No, that's good. I think of Steve Jobs when I think of that, right? Like he wanted to build and make technology to make people's lives better. He didn't just want to make billions of dollars.
Right.
His sole purpose was to build things to make people's lives easier.
Yes. And it bleeds into every Apple product from, well, when Steve Jobs was around.
Yeah.
And I would say, I mean, it was always sad to me because I felt like he made technology fun. And I didn't know that I loved technology because of Steve Jobs until he passed away. And I realized so much of what I'd loved about it actually came from him. But I mean, there's the second thing, though, about the idea of a client, which is that they are under you, right? It's someone you put that's under your care. They have to put themselves under you willingly. They have to be able to say, I'm going to give up my trust. I'm going to let you lead me and tell me what to do. And again, like, does that raise your value? Absolutely. When someone says, I'm going to put your opinion as the most valuable thing as far as this matter goes, even above my own, that means like you are absolutely putting them on a pedestal. So there's a beautiful synergy there, right? It's like, on one hand, you absolutely get to serve them and take care of them as best as you can and give wholly. And yet at the very same time, the other part of that deal is they have to not be kind of like you said about the difference between a client and a customer. They have to not be what I call a customer. A customer is someone who just, like you said, I mean, you kind of said it so perfectly at the get-go that I almost have nothing to add. But, a customer is someone who basically tells you what to do and you take money for it. And it's basically your job is to take a bunch of crap from them, suck it up and say, you're always right. And it feels horrible. It just feels absolutely horrible because it feels like they have no value for you. And a lot of times, I mean, in that relationship, that's the nature of that structure. Really, they have all the power and you have none of it. And I don't mean power in this abusive, egomaniacal sort of way. I just mean like, you have to feel like have a certain amount of kind of dignity and feel. I mean, it's not about an external thing. Like, like you have to be proud of what you're doing and feel good about it. And it's not 100% up to you in the world. Like doing things, I mean, it's 100% up to you in that you take a stand and you can create the situations for it. But of course, what's going to make you feel valued is kind of all that feedback from everyone else around after you do those actions. So anyway, yeah, I think it's that Roman definition of client is a beautiful way to kind of, it's a beautiful model because it resolves two things that people think of as very different. Like people think during a meeting, let's say during a sales process, oh, I got to kind of go and make someone, force them to hire me, peddle my wares, and I got to be really cheap. And it almost feels like a conflict. The idea of like either you serve them or you kind of force them into something, but you can't have both. But the reality is you absolutely can. It's like, if someone putting themselves under you while you willingly give up yourself for them is exactly that, right? It's like, And so if if you do a sales meeting right, you're going to bring tremendous value to your client, and you're going to help them. And at the very same time, those actions are going to compel them and make them feel like they have to hire you. And it's great. No pushiness. You don't have to, you don't have to be slimy or anything. But the result is people say, hey, I want you to shoot like yourself. I want you to be yourself. I want you to tell me when this tree is ugly, even if I say, hey, can we take a picture of this tree? And it's like the perfect balance of all things.
And so I think you mentioned one of the things is just the whole sales process, right? And there's a really important step, and this really stuck with me. And this is something that I've been conscious of, for the last few years. And I think it really helps us in our meetings with our clients is, you kind of have, I think a lot of photographers or any business, right? They kind of have a typical format to their sales meeting, right? There's some chit chat, if you will, or just some introductions. Yeah. And then a lot of times they move on from there right into some sort of a pitch or showing something or selling something. And then you talk about, okay, pricing and then wrap it up. But you pointed out that there's a very important step in between kind of that chit chat phase and the presentation phase that kind of is critical. Yeah. Do you want to talk about that? Because I think that's a big key in this whole momentum selling process.
Yeah, actually, you know what? I'm going to take a step backwards for this one.
Yeah.
Because there's this principle involved in that this is a little more high level, but I'd really love to get it out there.
Let's do it. Yeah.
It's just this classic marketing thing. But I think it works, and there are other ways of putting it. And there's some people who kind of like think, it's too old school and blah blah blah. But I think it works, and I think it's a very effective model. Anyway, the idea is that like whenever you want to present something, you want to go through this stage of creating a problem, agitating it, and solving it, right? And this goes to, and the reason I want to take it a little more high level is because it's not in any means just a sales thing. It's every bit as much a marketing thing. And if you go to a typical website that a business has, right? I mean, what happens when you go onto a website and usually you see a bunch of pictures and that's it. Or maybe you see some tagline that is virtually meaningless or completely generic, right? Or you go to an about page and all people do is they talk about themselves. I mean, let's use the about page because that's a page people usually put a lot of copy on, right? Mm-hmm. And all they do is they talk about themselves. I'm this, I'm that, I love this. And it's like, well, that addresses absolutely zero concerns of what's going on inside the client's head, right? If you want to move people, whether it's in a sales meeting and you're talking with them to bring this out, or in your marketing copy and you're writing about things, right? The first thing that you have to make people aware of is what their problem is. Because when you think about something, any service that someone comes into for the very first time, they're not going to be an expert. They won't know what they need. They won't know how to look at it. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about personal training or photography, right? So no one's going to understand photography and say, I get why photography is valuable in the way that we get it. I mean, they shouldn't because they're not photographers. I mean, in fact, that's the whole thing that makes us experts is that we get that and they don't, right? And they need to be made aware of kind of what photography means for them. And usually the way you start doing that is you have to introduce a problem. And I'll give you a simple example. I'm not going to make it photography specific just so that the example is a little bit more obvious, right? But if I sit around, if you come onto a page and let's say, I don't know, I'm trying to sell you an SEO product. I'm just making this up as I go. So we'll see how this lands. We'll see if this works. But I've got an SEO product for you to get unlimited, unlimited amounts of wedding photography clients, right? And so if the very first thing you come into the page and the very first thing I say is, hey, you need to start doing SEO because you're gonna, because it's gonna bring you tons of clients. Well, that's fine. That's a benefit, that gets people started. But it is way more powerful if you start off actually identifying people's problem to become aware of the value of that solution. Like what I just did is I just pitched you essentially kind of a solution. At least I gave it a benefit, right? I mean, but it would be even worse if I said this SEO solution has blah, blah, blah features, works quickly. And
yeah, that would be easy to install a plugin.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. New, special, easy. Just log into the website and it'll automatically do it for you. That would be even worse. And some people actually are like that. It's like, we have like 2 cameras and we'll do this and give you this many pictures. And they go into a whole pitch of, of their features without even talking about the benefits. But bringing it one step back, right? Imagine you come onto a page. So you come onto this web page. You're a photographer. You come onto it, and the very first thing it says is something like, the easiest example I can think of is, because this is always most of my business, really, I mean, for at least like 2/3 of my business, this is what consumed me, right? Is that you say something like, imagine this in a quote: I was tired of having months where I had, I had lots of business only to be followed up by even more months where nobody came in at all. I was constantly stressed and frustrated, and I felt like I didn't know what I needed to solve with my business, right? Who doesn't, if you read that and you're a business owner, I mean, who doesn't want to keep reading? I mean, when I go to other sites that say that almost those exact same words, I read it because the first thing they're doing is, like, sometimes people think, well, like, people think when you're the writer, it's like, oh, I'm just trying to lure you in or something like that, right? But there is nothing that could be more respectful in the world than identifying the exact problems that you have as a human being and saying, I get what your problems are. I deeply get them and have experienced them and know what's inside your head. But and so, I mean, on one hand, I think of, like, kind of letting people become aware of that. It's like, well, yes, it is tactical. It does produce a result that's beneficial from a marketer's standpoint. But actually, it also shows you kind of this awareness and sympathy and recognition that I'm not just doing this product to do this product. I'm doing this product because I know what your problems are, and that's what I'm trying to help you solve for real. And I'm not just going to pitch you the moment you hit my site. I'm going to take a little bit of time to give you an experience and help you give some context about what this is all going to be for, right? So you read a headline like that, and it's almost like, well, it's almost irresistible in a sense, because it's a problem that's so deeply connected to every business owner in the world that you want to know. It's like, okay, tell me what you got next, right? And then, so in other words, once people start to become aware of the problems they have, your value shoots up as a business. Because if you don't know your problems, then it's like, well, what's, a solution on its own means nothing, right? I mean, a solution has no value until a solution's value is defined by the scale of the problem. And most people, they kind of like to, let's say in a meeting, they'll present all their pictures, or on a website, they'll actually start throwing all the great things about their, like, once you've connected with people and shown you got their problems and shown you're going to solve them, talking about your personality or throwing that stuff in, great. But before that, it's actually, people think they're being, like, really cool and stuff like that, and they're not using kind of all the, I don't know. It's like, they're being kind of very independent and it's not like all markety. But what they're really doing is just talking about themselves instead of actually trying to identify with what the client really wants to hear about and needs. So, I mean, it works great at an emotional level, but it amplifies the level of, like, well, how much of a problem do I have? You've got to know the significance of the problem. If I don't know that a photographer, like, the way they capture things is going to create hollow pictures that seem very synthetic and boring and unlively, then I don't, people, I mean, everyone captures a moment. Even if you're bad at it, everyone captures a moment. And I might think as a potential client, I might think, yeah, that captures a moment. And until you actually start to make me aware of what a moment is and why I need them, it's like, I don't have that much value for it. So you need to start getting people to think about the scope of what it is that they're dealing with. And you need to get them to you need to get that to front of mind, because, usually that's actually in the back of people's minds. Somewhere in someone's head, they know that they would cry if there wasn't a single picture of grandma, at the end of the day. And by the way, in saying that, to take that a step further, I want to point out to people, like, a lot of times people think their value is like grandma. Oh, my value is I captured grandma. It's important to remember, actually, the value there is reliability. If you're saying I'm going to capture grandma, what you're really saying is I'm reliable. I'm responsible. I'm going to learn about the people I need to shoot. And that's a very different value. A lot of times people present the wrong one. But anyway, I'm kind of cutting myself off and digressing. Getting back to the point, in the back of people's minds, they know if they don't get a picture of grandma, they're going to cry. Or they know that maybe pictures feel too generic and not special enough. Wow, I'm really dark. Sorry, I just peeked down as my screen. I should have turned on. I mean, I'm trying to think of that. There are no lights around here that I can reach right now. So I'll just keep on going.
Spencer's coming to us from a cave right now for those who are watching.
Well, I feel like even in one of those 80s videos or something, where it's like you just got this head and it's all black. Yeah. Anyway. But getting back to it, right? You have to get out kind of what the real deep underlying problem is. And so like when I was just talking about that example for a headline of business, I mean, I've said things like that, and I want people to read my copy, but I'm saying it because it's like I have lived it and I know it, and I know this is what's inside people's minds. And I know that if I want you to actually take action and do things that are going to make your business better, I need to make you aware of what's going on, I have to give you a mirror to kind of hold up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, same thing. It's the exact same sort of situation we're dealing with when we sell photography. So someone hits a page, someone goes to a website, someone comes into a meeting, you establish kind of like, you figure out kind of their whatever problems are really there. And then you get that out, and usually you kind of agitate. Agitate means that you just basically kind of, either if you're in person, you keep talking about it. If you're sitting around and looking at a website, it means you kind of keep writing about it. Again, kind of going to it. Like, I find it tremendously disrespectful. Like, here's what would be kind of going to an example of scammy. It's like, if you go to a website and I had a line like that, and then the next line is, but let me solve that right now by selling you this thing. Instead of like, well, I've just like lured you in to go and pitch something to you, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like, well, yeah, I mean, it's kind of like, I haven't even taken the time again to get to know you, or
right, you just jumped right to the,
Yeah, and that's exactly, I mean, I've seen so many people, like, they'll have a Facebook campaign and they'll have a landing page, right? And the landing page will have exactly something like that. They'll think in their headline, like, what can I really do to grab people's attention? And yes, it is grabbing people's attention that you want to do, but you want to do it for a more kind of, hopefully, like you said about Steve Jobs, you want to do it for a more deep set and more meaningful reason than just to grab their attention, right? I mean, you have to have something better you're trying to do for people, or else it will come through as kind of just a cheap ploy, because that's exactly what's happening. But if you're doing it for something real, and you give people all that material, then it won't. And so, people will have a headline, and then the next thing they'll say is, and I have 10 days, I have a limited number of days available. So if, sign up for this form now, and you can get a special discount. And it's like, well, okay. So in other words, the structure of this is I've just tried to suck you in with a headline to make you feel something. And then I've just started throwing garbages at you and promoting you all in my own self-interest, right? And I see that type of stuff all the time. It's like, well, if you want to make an effective landing page, the thing you should be going into next is you should follow up with the agitation. I mean, it sounds strategic and manipulative, and it is strategic, but it's no more manipulative than writing a good story. Every good story is manipulative. That's, in fact, if it's not, it's like a textbook, and it's just really boring. We want things to be manipulative. Like, it's like if you go to a classroom and the teacher is like doing all these things in this funky, fun way to make it fun for you. That's the experience you want. You don't want straight up information, which is what a lot of times people like to give. You want an experience. So, you have to care enough for the client to create an experience. So you get that headline. Anyway, I'm going on and on, but you get that headline, and then, you build that up. And so that's the agitation stage. And the reason it works is because once people are interested and that's starting to get to the front of their mind, now you can start to round it out. You can start to talk about, well, have you had this, or have you had that? Or, you can tell a story about blah, blah, blah. And, wedding, didn't capture a picture of grandma was going on these lines, or if you're kind of about, or maybe it's more aspirational. If it's like, let's say you have a very glamorous sort of polished fashion-y style, and then you're going to build up this world and talk about the client's, kind of the client's world and the challenges about why that doesn't happen, and how, unflattering pictures, and how horrible an unflattering picture can be, and showing someone at the wrong angle, and all that stuff. And you're kind of agitating what's on their mind, right?
Right.
In that particular example, it's like, oh no, I'm going to look horrible, and it's not going to look like how I see myself. And and then once you get through all that, then people are going to be finally interested enough to be willing to listen to what you have to sell them. And they're actually going to want you to sell. I mean, I'm simplifying, but that's when people are going to start to say, okay, I'd like to know what you've got as a fix.
Yeah, because I think a lot of people, probably a lot of customers, or clients, they come in to meet with a wedding photographer because initially it's another thing on the checklist, right? Like they know they need a venue, they know they need a caterer, because that's just what tradition has told them, or somebody else has said, oh yeah, you need these things for a wedding. So a lot of times they come in not even knowing, like, why are we even here? We know we need a wedding photographer, but then you got to get them understanding the importance of it and thinking about it. Because if they don't, then they're just coming in and looking at your pricing and comparing it to the 3 other photographers that they looked at and going, okay, well, this person's the cheapest and the photos seem pretty, so okay. But if you can actually, like you say, kind of identify what some of the issues are, that again, they might not even know they have, and then start to work towards how you can solve some of those problems.
Yeah, and I'm glad you just reeled that in, because I'm like, damn, that was a long explanation.
No, that's
so, but yeah, I mean, you said it just right? I mean, people really, they don't have you have to make them, I mean, the short explanation is exactly what you said. They have to be aware of kind of what they need to have solved before you're going to go and try to solve it for them.
Yeah, I think I forget, I think it was Joe Busink. I watched a great thing on him, and it was actually, it was kind of behind the scenes of how he dealt with a sales consultation.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of his was approaching, like an example that he did was, when's the last, in talking with the couple, when's the last time the family all got together and did a photograph together? And they said, oh, geez, wow, it's been a really, really long time. The last time we got together was at, grandma so-and-so's funeral, and we don't have a great family photograph. Oh, let me show you some example, how can we get the family together and get a really nice portrait, right? And showed some examples of, here's some great family portraits during the wedding. Then they start thinking about, oh yeah, we need to get some family portraits done. And it gets them all thinking, in a different direction, as opposed to, oh, we just have to hire a photographer for the wedding.
Right.
Gets them.
Right. That's a great microscopic example, right? And I mean, in a matter of seconds, you've just described a scenario that takes people through all three of those things. You introduce a problem, you extend on it, agitate it a little bit, and then you give a solution, and you let people keep talking about it. And it goes from like, I hate formals to, oh yeah, that's really nice. And it completely changes. Like, people at first, what they're thinking is like, this is stuffy, and this is what my grandparents did or my parents did. But then, I mean, in your example, right, you go through that and you're like, oh, okay, I see the value of that. That's important. Perfect. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. So it's playing on that kind of that emotional side, right? Because wedding photography is an emotional purchase, right? Nobody needs wedding photography at the end of the day, right? Like, people always come to us and they say, oh, weddings are so expensive. And we always say, a wedding actually isn't that expensive. You can get married for about $400.
Right.
But throwing a big party with an open bar for, 200 of your closest friends and family, that's what's expensive.
Yeah.
All relative. So it's a very emotional purchase when they're buying photography, right?
Yeah.
So if you can get them thinking and getting those problems, I really like that approach. So that's kind of, would you say, is that the impetus kind of behind the idea of momentum selling?
Yeah, the big picture takeaway with momentum selling is that sales, really, at the end of the day, it's not about being nice, and it's not about giving people stuff. It is about serving people, mm-hmm. but that's not really kind of the thing that makes sales as a meeting kind of psychologically effective. Is just, you need to get people excited. Like that example we just talked about, like that little micro example with the family pictures, right? That's how you could take someone, in simplest terms, from being indifferent about something to saying, hey, this is actually, I want this. And I mean, that's not like jumping up and down excited in that case, but I mean, that gets interest, that gets some level of energy and involvement. Mm-hmm. And so in the big scope of things, what you want to do is you want to take people, you want to make sure that kind of it's about their emotional experience. Kind of like I was saying, like that, there's that word again, experience, right? It's about their emotional experience throughout the entire meeting, and making sure that by the time they walk away, they're kind of really by the time you're showing them prices and things like that, a lot of people, they don't try to do the selling until they show the prices. And then, of course, they don't want to do any selling because it feels really, slimy, which is true. I mean, if you haven't built up any excitement and you actually haven't taken the time to really get to know your client in kind of that really deep, meaningful way that's going to actually help them, serve them, then it's like, well, yeah, then, it's like, of course it's going to feel slimy. Mm-hmm. And of course you're not going to want to sell at that point because you haven't built up any real value during the meetings. So the idea is, you want to have an emotional structure that kind of keeps getting people more and more engaged and interested. And the great thing is, it actually, like you just pointed out with the family photos, it actually makes them see more and more value in what you do along the way. Like, those things are equated. Like, when people have a good experience, they actually value things more. And
right. It becomes less about the price at that point, right? So then the point at which you present the pricing and the packaging and all of that is really just more the close than that you're selling to them. You've already kind of done all the selling process leading up to that. Now it's just formalities.
Exactly. It's not right. The close should almost be kind of like a series of formalities in a sense, right? They're not, it shouldn't be the high pressure part. You shouldn't need that because it's like you said, it's about emotion. If you get people's emotion where it needs to be, then the close actually becomes pretty easy and you don't have to get all stressed out about it and worried and stuff like that. And I'm not saying it takes no practice and you can't screw it up, but really, I mean, it's not about the close. It's about everything that happens before the close. And I think kind of that's, like I was saying in my example about being pushy, people like a lot of times think, I want to be really nice, or I want to be really professional, or I want to be really impressive. And these things are all about how you want to be perceived by your client. And it's like, you need to get focused on like, I want them to feel blank. Like that would almost be the first thought, whether it's a marketing campaign or you're doing sales. The very first thing I would ask people is like, well, maybe not the first, but one of the first questions I'd ask anyone is like, what do you want them to feel? Like, I'll throw in this totally random thing that I was just thinking about the other day, because I used to be a graphic designer.
Mm-hmm.
And all the time, you would like create designs in the abstract with a client you barely knew at all. And so you'd choose a color palette, you'd choose a look, you'd say, this is what I think would be great for you. And a lot of times you barely really knew what they did and what they stood for and who their audience was. And things are more sophisticated now than when I was doing it. But still, I mean, a lot of times people like $5 logo and they're just getting handed like some logo that looks maybe okay, maybe not, depending.
Yeah.
But sometimes they look pretty good. And they're getting handed a logo that looks decent. But the problem is that, like, in reality, like there's some sort of audience out there that you're trying to reach, right? I mean, everyone has this specific audience. You should know exactly who you're trying to reach. They should have very specific characteristics. They should have kind of things they like to do, places they like to hang out, and it should be only, your audience does it and other people's audiences don't, or else you don't have a very specific targeted audience. Well, here's my point. Different people respond to like different colors and different looks, right? Let's even just choose something as simple as color. I mean, in all honesty, if you don't know your audience, you can't even pick the right color for your logo, much less the design and every other part of it, or the typeface, or kind of whether it's going to be blocky or thin, or every other part of it. You can't even pick a color. And so if you think about it, though, most people, they create full-fledged or hire other people to make full-fledged designs without ever thinking about who their audience is, right? And so, well, what good is that going to do you? The whole point of a design is to make someone react and say, I like this person. This person's for me, because you pick the logo that your ideal client is going to say, that type of logo makes me feel good. It makes me feel comfortable. It makes me feel that's the type of person I like to work with. I like companies that have that type of logo, and I see that you have it, so I'm going to want to, I'm interested. Show me more, right? Mm-hmm. And so the very first question I'd say for anyone to ask in sales as well as marketing, branding, is like, how do you want, what reaction are you trying to generate in whoever you're trying to reach? And so I see this as more of a global principle, but as goes for momentum sales, it's the exact same thing there, right? You have to think about like, what is not whether I want to be pushy or whether I don't want to be pushy, or whether I want to look slick or professional or, homey or modest or whatever. It's like, those are all about me. My first thing is like, I have to look at the client and say, what is the experience I want them to have? What do I want them to see? And how do I make, if I choose that I want to be homey, is that going to be the right thing for them? It's going to make them feel good, comfortable, taken care of, all that type of stuff. And so usually it's like this big mental block. We see the world as how we want to be perceived and what we want out of things. But all of business is actually the exact opposite. You have to see the whole business as like what, you have to see it's all about all the people you're trying to reach out there and what you want to give them and do for them.
Awesome. It's fascinating. It's the whole sales marketing. It's a whole world that you could, we could have you on for hours and talk about all kinds of different topics and stuff like that. But I think we've sort of teased the audience a little bit. Hopefully we've given them some things to, to think about when it comes to just once they get those clients kind of in the door, but really even before that, right? Really that, like you mentioned, kind of thinking about what's the experience that you want the clients to have, and that's going to inform all your decisions from your marketing and your branding, your advertising, to just the experience of when they come to meet with you, through to the the experience on the day of the wedding, through to the experience on the delivery. It's all tied in, part and parcel of the same thing, right? It's that client experience. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Excellent.
Good summary.
So yeah, so some great advice. If people want to kind of learn more, and we'll wrap up. We'll give you a chance to kind of let people know where to go to find out any more information. But before we go on, we want to just normally we'll do a listener question, but I think we've run a little bit long this week, so we'll skip the listener question this week and save it for another week. But I want to jump to our picks of the week and give you a chance to share your pick with us, because I know you'd got a great pick there for us. So
yes, absolutely. I forgot the full title of the book I'm reading right now. So let me pull it up. It's sitting on my phone over here to the side.
Perfect. Yeah.
It is, let's see. Of course, that's when the phone crashes. But it's one of, every book nowadays has like one of these uber long titles. You've got the short title and they all have to have like the whole description part. And I never remember just like,
yeah.
It's like books used to have names, right?
Yeah. The Odyssey, the Iliad. It's like,
simple. So the book is, it's by Anne Handley. It's Everybody Writes, Your Go-To Guide to Creating Ridiculously Good Content. And so, I've been spending a lot of time over the past couple of years, like reading up on copywriting and how to use words and all that, because I think that was kind of one of those things I really hadn't looked at that much along the way. I mean, I've written in some form or another for a very long time, but copywriting is kind of much more purposeful, and it's much more kind of about how you get business. And so I think it's kind of gives a really good description of the considerations that you need to have. So I highly recommend it.
Excellent. Everybody Writes. And what was the author again?
Anne Handley.
Anne Handley. Perfect. We'll put a link to it in the show notes for this episode for those. Oh. Sorry, are you still there? We dropped out for a second. Sorry.
Yeah, it looks like there's a little bit of a dropout.
It dropped out on my end, so I'm going to pick it up from where I was. Okay. So I'm going to call an audible this week. I'm going to make mine also a book pick, because when we were talking here, it got me thinking of a great book called Purple Cow by Seth Godin. If you've ever had a chance, I don't know have you read that book?
Good choice. Yes. I love that one. It's actually, someone asked me about what was it? I think they'd asked me about kind of the thing that really changed the way I thought about marketing, and that was it. So love your pick.
Yeah, so that's a pick. So that's a Purple Cow by Seth Godin. It's a fantastic kind of marketing sales book. Kind of that whole talk when we were talking about selling ice to the Eskimos kind of got me thinking about that book. So. Excellent. Good stuff. Well, that brings us to the end of another episode of TWiP Weddings. I want to thank our sponsors for their support and remind our audience to send in your questions for the show and share your thoughts by commenting on the blog post for this episode. Now, Spencer, if people want to learn more about you or follow along or learn more about momentum selling, where can people go? And you just recently kind of launched a fairly new resource for people, right, with the momentum sales course?
I mean, I've got a bunch of resources, but the place I tell people to go, I mean, if you go just straight to my homepage, that's at www.ground-glass.com. That's the place I say to check out, because the first thing you'll see there is you can sign up for the newsletter. The newsletter gets you this cool free course. It goes through kind of the whole foundation of putting a business together and all the things you need to consider, and it just goes straight to your inbox. So you get that, but what you also get is, I got a bunch of things in the work. I've got momentum sales. I'm developing kind of a marketing branding program. I'm also actually having a really fun group, kind of a group course where people are going to go through it together, and you're going to get these daily assignments that I'm working on. So bunch of stuff that is in the works right now, and you'll be informed of all of that along with getting the free course. So that's all there.
Excellent. So that's ground-glass.com. And how about if they want to follow you on social networks? Where's the best place to follow you? Where do you spend most of your time? Twitter, or on Facebook, Instagram?
I am horribly inactive, but I've got accounts on all of them. I mean, if you got Twitter, you go to Spencer Lum. Facebook, the Ground Glass page is the place to check out.
Awesome. Good stuff. We'll direct people there. And again, we'll put links to that in the show notes if you want to find Spencer's stuff. Head on over there. Great resource. I enjoy visiting the site and reading your blog posts, and gets me thinking about sales and marketing as well. So.
All right.
And if you want to follow my stuff, you can visit my website, which is at momentsindigital.com. Or if you want to follow me on social media, I'm at Bruce Clark with an E at the end of Clark. So Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all those good places. And of course, be sure to visit our website at thisweekinphoto.com. There you'll find this show, TWiP Weddings, plus all the other great shows that are part of the TWiP network. And thanks again for listening to TWiP Weddings, raising the bar one wedding at a time.